Ross Tucker from the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Welcome to the show, Ross. How you doing, buddy?
Ryan, I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me. Happy draft day.
Yeah, happy draft day. It's always fun to reminisce. I just talked to the guys here and all our viewers and listeners about my theory or my philosophy when it comes to drafting players and what the NFL has become. And to me, it's all about the passer, the guy that protects the passer, and the guy that rushes the passer. And there are a bunch of offensive linemen this year that fit that role. And I don't want to see teams reach for flashy Ferraris and wide receivers and, no need running backs when you got offensive linemen that need to protect your passer. What are your thoughts about that? And where do you think tonight goes in terms of what happens after all the quarterbacks go?
Well, listen, we all know quarterback's the most important position. I think there's some debate as to what the second most important position is. I've often said I think it's D-line because I think an individual D-line or a group of defensive linemen can have a bigger impact than the O-line. But I think O-line's third. I agree with you, I guess, Ryan, because I think it's quarterback 1, D-line 2, O-line 3. The thing that's interesting about O-line versus D-line, though, is if you have one outstanding D-lineman, like an Aaron Donald or whoever, right, they can really make a huge impact. But if you have one outstanding offensive lineman, that's nice. It's really nice to have that. But the reality is what really matters is how that unit does as a group. In other words, you're almost only as good as your worst O-lineman up front. I'd rather have 5 average offensive linemen than have 2 studs and 2 duds, if that makes sense, right? So whereas drafting a D-lineman high, that one guy can make a huge impact. On the O-line, you really just can't have anybody that stinks. Like, you can't have anybody out there that can't play. As long as all 5 guys are average or better, you'll actually be in pretty good shape.
Well, I think that's exactly right, and that's why when teams are or fans are clamoring about no, don't draft another offensive lineman. We got one a year ago. No, you build the best offensive line you can, and whatever that takes. So when I hear people coming out of Cincinnati saying that they're going to draft Jamar Chase at number 5 rather than Penei Sewell to bolster that offensive line, which was the liability a year ago that got their franchise quarterback on the gurney headed out of the stadium, it shocks me. What do you think the Bengals will do, but what should they do at number 5 when they have their name called?
Well, so that's interesting, right, for a couple of different reasons. Because, number one, it's a pretty deep O-line group, but it's also a pretty deep wide receiver group. So if you think, I know people out there, Ryan, that will say Jamar Chase is the best wide receiver prospect since at least 2015. I had a guy on the Fantasy Feast podcast who, tracks all the numbers. What Jamar Chase did at age 19 in the SEC is just insane. So if you're the Bengals, you could look at it like, man, Jamar Chase is so much better than any of the other receivers. And at the top of round 2, we could still get a really good starting offensive lineman, whether that's Landon Dickerson inside or Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame at tackle, Sam Cosmi from Texas. So I think, and if you're only looking at the first-round pick, I think you lean towards the offensive line. But if you're looking at those as a combo over the first couple rounds, you have to decide, would you rather have Chase and Eichenberg or Sewell and like Rondale Moore or one of these slot receivers?
Right.
I really do think that's how a lot of these teams look at it.
And that's how I would look at it, too. I'd look at an opportunity just like it is with a running back in that second or third round. You can get those guys. Justin Jefferson a year ago was as good as anybody, but that didn't change the wins and losses, right? He wasn't the deciding factor that puts because they still need somebody to get him the football, and the quarterback play had to have been better there. So that's what we're looking at. Tonight, the San Francisco 49ers have what people consider the the hinge vote or the hinge choice in determining where this first round goes and how the dominoes will fall. I think it really comes down to the third and fourth picks in San Francisco and Atlanta. But all the speculation around who goes third and the move that the 49ers made, we're about time, Ross. Where does the 49ers go tonight with that third overall pick?
I'm still saying Mac Jones. And it sounds like there's a little bit more buzz today about Trey Lance potentially there at number 3. But I'm still saying Mac Jones for a couple of reasons. Number one, Chris Sims, who maybe you already had or you're going to have on the show today. He and Kyle Shanahan have like matching ankle tattoos or something. And right when it happened, he said Mac Jones. I don't picture, Kyle Shanahan doesn't have to be quiet about it. They knew that it's going to be Lawrence at 1 and Wilson at 2. I don't think he would, put Chris Sims on the wrong track if he didn't have to. But I'll go even a step further, Ryan. I remember, I think it was like 2010. It was the first year for the Shanahans in Washington. I went to Washington training camp, and I was talking with Kyle. It was first year that I was just talking about how he had absolutely tore up the league with the Houston Texans. I mean, the Texans put up crazy numbers when Kyle was their OC. And, Andre Johnson, the whole deal. And he looked at me and he said, quarterback is really good. I said, yeah, Matt Shaw's pretty good. He said, no. Quarterback's really good. So what I know from talking with him and from what other people have said, he really loves guys like Schaub and Cousins. He really, I think, and you know how coaches are, Ryan, I think he really just wants the guy to execute what he tells him to do. He doesn't want the variance. Like, Lance or maybe Fields or whoever are more talented and can do some things that a guy like Mac Jones couldn't. But he doesn't care about the upside. He just doesn't want the downside variance. He just wants his quarterback to do what he tells him to do. Throw it to the right guy and throw it accurately like Schaub and Cousins do.
And isn't that why, Ross, he's loved Jimmy Garoppolo so much and why he's stuck with them, I think, through the thick and thin? It's because he does that. It's just it's so limiting in the eyes of other people that he's kind of had to make a concession here.
I don't know that he has loved Jimmy G that much. I mean, it feels like, last year they tried to get Brady. It feels like every year they've tried to upgrade that spot. I mean, I think he really wanted to get Cousins back in the day, but they realized that might not be able to happen. And Jimmy G was available. The Patriots called him. I mean, it was one of the weirdest trades ever that doesn't get talked about enough. The Patriots literally just called the Niners and offered him Jimmy G. There were other teams out there that would have given up more for Jimmy G, but Belichick wanted to trade him to Kyle Shanahan and the Niners specifically for whatever reason. I mean, I remember some reports out there where teams said, yeah, we were a little surprised that we didn't get a chance. So I don't know that Kyle has ever really loved Jimmy G as much as that was the best quarterback option that was available when Belichick called them.
If that's the case, we're talking to Ross Tucker from the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, at Russ Tucker NFL on Twitter. If that's the case, is Jimmy Garoppolo long for that locker room after tonight's pick is announced?
No. I already tweeted this. He'll be a Patriot by the end of the weekend. I mean, I would be stunned. I don't want to say stunned. I think there's a better than 50% chance that the Patriots trade a low-round pick. Because I don't think there's going to be that many other. Like, who else would be interested in Jimmy G? Maybe the Bears, but I tend to doubt it. I think you could make the argument the Texans with Nick Caserio would be interested if they anticipate getting rid of Deshaun Watson for whatever reason, or that maybe Deshaun won't be able to play this year. But I really think it's New England. I don't think the Patriots are going to trade up. I'm not buying that. I don't think they're going to get a quarterback in the first round. I think they trade a late-round pick for Jimmy G. They know him. They like him. He's still young. He knows their offense. I think that just like they thought 4 years ago or whatever it was. I think that McDaniels and Belichick think Jimmy G's really good, and they can win a bunch of games with him, and they can get him for a late-round pick, and they'll probably even make the Niners take on some of Jimmy G's salary for this year. So I'd almost be surprised, Ryan, if that doesn't happen.
All right, running backs. Pittsburgh Steelers fans out there clamoring for the possibility of Travis Etienne or Najee Harris in that spot. Is there a running back you think that goes in the first round, and should there be one? Because to your point earlier, you can find these guys later down in the draft process, but giving up or wasting a first-round draft pick on a player that maybe isn't necessarily the only hole you have, which one is the right fit for a team in the first round?
Well, it's interesting because, talking with different folks on the Ross Tucker podcast, there's actually three really good running backs. Etienne, Najee Harris, and Javonte Williams at UNC, who I absolutely love. Like, that guy is a monster. I love Javonte Williams. I wouldn't be surprised if he went in the first round. But there's actually a pretty decent drop-off after that. Most of the other guys people say are more like 4th, 5th, 6th rounders. So that's another one of those where you could say, if you're the Steelers or whoever, you could say, okay, we take who we think is the best running back at 24 and then get a starting caliber offensive lineman in round 2 because there's just more of them. So I think that element's interesting because usually there's a lot of depth at running back, and it feels like this year, for whatever reason, there's really not. I like Javonte Williams, and there's positives of Etienne, there's positives of Najee Harris, but wow, I think a lot of people, North Carolina doesn't play as many nationally televised games as Clemson, Alabama, but that dude is awesome. Like, making guys miss, breaking tackles, I think he's a monster.
Ross Tucker, we're talking to here from the Ross Tucker podcast, former NFL offensive lineman. Talk to us about your draft. What that was like, what leading up to it and everything like that. We discussed a little bit about what it was like 23 years ago for me and how much it's changed and the hoopla and the extravaganza that we're going to see play out in real time tonight.
So what's funny about that, Ryan, is mine was 2001, so 20 years ago, and I was such a bottom-of-the-barrel prospect that I knew I wasn't getting drafted. My agent, actually, Joe Linta, he's got, Joe Flacco and Juszczyk and Cam Brate and a bunch of guys. He gets a lot of Ivy League guys. He said to me, 50-50 whether or not I would even get signed, Ryan. Even get signed. So I sat there and watched every second of the draft. I only got 2 phone calls, one in the first round and one in, the 5th round each day. And both calls were from the Cincinnati Bengals. So you have to remember, this, Ryan, because you were 98, but in 2001, the Bengals were the worst of the worst. They hadn't had a winning season in 10 years. But when my phone rang in the first round, I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to be a Bengal. Let's do this. Meanwhile, they were just saying, hey, Ross, if you don't get drafted, we might be interested in you. I was like, oh, okay. But I'm ready now. If you want me now, I'm ready. So the funniest thing about it is my agent, Ryan, Joe Linta, he said, the longer it waits for me to call you after the draft, the worse the sign is. The worse of it. So I was sitting there, dude, all my college roommates and teammates had gone out every night second semester of senior year. I got up at 5 a.m. to train. I sat there for an hour after the draft. Nothing. So finally, I'm starving. I go out to the eating club. Yes, it sounds fancy. It probably is. So I go out to the eating club. They're all outside grilling, having beers, and I'm I'm starving. I couldn't eat. I got out there. Nobody would even look at me. Nobody would talk to me because they could just tell on my face how upset I was. I walked back to my dorm room. As I'm walking up the steps, I hear my phone ringing. I'm on the 3rd floor. So as I'm sprinting up the steps, I grab my phone, and it's Joe Linton. He says, Ross. I said, what? He's like, where have you been? And I said, you told me it would take a while. If it took a long time to call me, that I wasn't going to get signed. I was hungry. He's like, well, you're the newest member of the Washington Redskins at the time, right? Washington football team now. That was, I mean, I went from as low as I've ever been in my life, thinking I just gave up my whole second semester senior year of partying for nothing to getting signed. I ran back out to the eating club. I walk out into the courtyard where everybody is, and I just say to my buddies, Redskins. And they all went crazy. We started jumping up and down. Everybody was excited. All the girls were looking over at me. I was like, yeah, see, you should have hung out with me. Too bad now. It was awesome.
Oh, God, draft day stories, man. That's a good one. That is a good one for sure. Yeah, you are listless and then overjoyed in a matter of moments. Thank you, Ross Tucker Football Podcast, for joining us. Have a great rest of the draft day. We're so excited to see how it all plays out. Thanks again, bud.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm listening on SiriusXM 211. Very curious to hear how Brockman feels about Jimmy G coming back to New England. I'll be listening to you guys.
Russ, let's just talk about it right now.
Okay.
I have zero interest in Jimmy Garoppolo. Zero. What is the point of
every Patriot fan is saying that, Chris? Why do you say that?
Okay, then why are you bringing him in? Is he going to back up Cam Newton, or is he going to be the starting quarterback?
He's going to be the starting quarterback because they believe he's better than Cam Newton.
Then why did they sign Cam and give him a raise if they were just going to trade for Jimmy this whole time?
Because they didn't know they were just going to trade for Jimmy this whole time, because they didn't know the Niners were going to trade up to 3 to get Mac Jones.
Who's the third quarterback on the roster then? Because these guys' shelf life isn't much longer. Cam's on a 1 year, and Jimmy's been hurt most of the last 3 seasons.
They'll draft like a Jimmy G, Ryan Mallett, second, third, fourth round dude.
I just don't understand
I
just don't get the upside of this move.
So the upside is, Chris, he's still pretty young, and they think he's pretty good. I mean, I think they think in their offense, they could be a perennial playoff team. I mean, he just took a team 2 years ago to the Super Bowl and was one pass away from winning it. And I think that they think that they're as good as the Niners are. So I think that, and I think the other part about it is, I just think that they want to have a winning record and get to the playoffs. I just think Belichick knows that everybody is paying attention to what he's doing. They all know what Brady did last year. They all know what he did last year. And I think if nothing else, he believes he can win more games with Garoppolo this year and figure out the future later, depending on how Jimmy does.
It's fair, and I totally get that, but then you got to take the Cam Newton part into it. Cam has dedicated himself to this team. He's been there, voluntary workouts. We've all seen the work he's putting in. He got a raise in his 1 year deal this year, and you're just going to tell him, thanks, no thanks? You're the backup now? I just don't see that sitting well.
Well, I think that they'll let him compete. I think they'll let him compete and ultimately play whoever they think is best for the job. Plus, both those guys get injured a lot. They've got a lot of injury issues. That's the one thing I think is interesting, Chris. I don't know if you know this, but in the Patriots training room, there's a huge sign that says the most important ability is availability.
Right.
So that's the one thing I don't know about Belichick and Jimmy G is I guess I wonder how much the injuries in San Francisco have turned him off. Now, maybe it hasn't. I don't know, right? But that's very, very important in New England. Very important. So I wonder if the only thing that would prevent them, in my mind, from going for Jimmy G is if they're just concerned about how often he gets hurt.
Yeah, and I know we got to go, Ross, and thanks for joining us. But even the 1 year he got a chance to play when Tom was suspended, he got hurt.
He got hurt. Yeah, Jacoby Brissett had to come out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what? God doesn't make many people that good-looking and durable. You know what I mean? Like
clearly, with your picture and your beard, yeah, I agree with that. Ross Tucker, everybody, from the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.